Hi everyone, the ACT essay. You'll probably want paper and pencil for this part of the course, so please put me on pause and grab those if you don't have them already. Are you ready? Here we go. The ACT essay in a nutshell. You have 30 minutes. You have 4 pages. You need to write at least 3, okay? You're going to have 2 people read this. They can each give you a possible 6. 6 plus 6 means a perfect score is a 12, okay? Now, if you get an 8, it is a victory. That means each of them gave you a 4 and that you will get into college, all right? They will not hold you out of college because of your essay, all right? Not you'll get into college, but you will definitely be looked at as being college ready. Okay, so you need to do what I tell you to do, and if you learn your grammar rules, you'll be fine. They are going to give you a prompt. A prompt is a fancy word for a question. They will give you 1 pro argument and 1 con. The prompt will present a problem, and then they will give you the pro and the con. Your job is to read the question and to immediately decide to argue one side. You will write a first person, that means I, me, we, opinionated, argumentative essay about this topic. You're going to write neatly, you're going to write a lot, you're going to use a lot of specific examples, you're going to use a big font, and you're going to drop in at least 1 or 2 impressive words, which I'll tell you what to say. Don't worry. Okay, they're only going to read your essay for about 3 minutes. So you want to wow them. You want this first paragraph to be fantastic. You need to write neatly, so if you need to work on your handwriting, do it, okay? To be effective, you are going to have to come up with 2 arguments to support yourself. So we're going to talk about that, and you're going to have to support each one of those arguments with 2 examples. Now, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but as you read the prompt, you should start thinking which side you could argue the best. Which side could you write 3 pages about? Okay, and you have to fill up 3 pages or this good score is going to go out the window, okay? Now, we're going to talk about a few words that you can pop in, and that will be very helpful. What you want to do is use your time wisely. You want to leave yourself a couple minutes at the end to reread your first paragraph to make sure that you've written it well. Okay, remember, 30 minutes flies, so you have to plan your attack. Now, which side will you take? What will your arguments be? How will you support your arguments? Remember, you're going to have to figure out your best plan of attack and to hit the ground running, okay? And one more time, that first paragraph is their first impression of you as a writer. Okay, here we go. Typical prompt. You can read along with me as I read it. Many high school students get involved in traffic accidents. Therefore, some people have suggested that there ought to be a minimum grade requirement for teenagers wishing to obtain a license to drive. Some people believe that this would be a good idea, as good grades suggest a degree of responsibility. Other people do not believe that this would be a good idea, as grades do not necessarily correlate with driving ability. In your opinion, should there be a minimum GPA required to obtain a driver's license? All right, then this is what they say, so you can read along with me. In your essay, take a position on this question. You may write about either one of the 2 points of view given, or you may present a different point of view on this question. Use specific reasons and examples to support your position. All right. Now let's talk about this typical prompt. The question involves something that someone your age would be interested in discussing, and they always do that. They're also always going to give you 1 plus argument, positive, agreeing with it, that the policy change would be a great thing, like good grades equals good drivers, so it's good, and a negative argument. Grades don't necessarily mean that you're going to be a skilled driver, so it's not good. Now you have to decide not what you truly believe. That's not what I'm telling you. You decide the side you could argue the best. Okay? And with my formula, You're going to be allowed to use one of their arguments, but it's got to be your second argument, your second reason why you think you're right. The first one's going to have to come from your head. So you're going to have to start thinking about what you could argue. All right. Now, most teenagers that I know are great at arguing a case. All right, what if you could win a great prize for winning this debate? What would you argue? Let me give you some ideas of how to think of an argument. Okay, when you change a policy, when you're changing the way things are, it always costs somebody something. Do you ever think about that? When you change a law, it's going to take time. It's going to cost somebody money. It may cost freedom. It may cost some emotion. You might lose some opportunities because of the law. So that idea of cost may come in very handy as you try to come up with an argument against any new policy. As I said, cost doesn't just mean money cost. It means time cost, emotional cost, freedom cost. We're going to come back to that later as we develop our essay. Now, put me on pause as we go, and please write all this down for yourself. Make sure you have that paper and draw 5 rectangles that look like this. Put me on pause if you need to. Got your rectangles? All right, here we go with the general outline. Paragraph 1, first sentence. Make it a quote that you pretend you heard someone say as you walk through the halls of your high school. For example, quote, I can't believe I won't get my driver's license this year because I've struggled so much with calculus and Spanish. My grades have taken a real hit. Okay? So the first sentence is going to be something that you make up. You pretend like you heard. Second sentence you need to memorize, so put it on pause if you need to. This quote could be heard in high school hallways across America as students discuss blank. Here's an example. This quote could be heard in high school hallways across America as students discuss having GPA minimums in order to obtain a driver's license. Okay? Easy enough. Third sentence, your thesis. I emphatically believe that. Now, make sure you use the word emphatically. Make sure you know how to spell it. I emphatically believe that students should be allowed to obtain a driver's license without any regard to their academic performance in school. So I stated my side on this issue. Fourth sentence, not only will this policy blah, 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 but also it will blah, blah, blah. Now here's how we'd adapt it for this one. Not only will this policy cost a great deal of money and time for the licensing bureaus, but also grades in school have no correlation to driving ability. Okay, let's talk about this first paragraph. Remember, the first sentence may sound a little stupid, funny. Just make sure it helps your side of the argument. Make sure you use quotation marks, but don't identify the speaker. It's just some random dude or girl at your school, okay? Someone you made up in your head. The second sentence should be a could, not a can. That's the biggest mistake I see people make. I'm not saying it can be heard because it's a made-up thing. It could be heard. So make sure you memorize that sentence correctly. Now, the third sentence must be clear. The highest essay scores go to those students who paraphrase the prompt. However, if you struggle with writing, you can just copy the language from the prompt. Okay? The fourth sentence I call the roadmap. The first blank, the first blah, 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 holds your first argument, and the second blank, the second blah, 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 holds your second argument. Okay, so as I told you, you can use their idea for your second argument. You're going to have to come up with your own idea for the first one, and we're going to come back to it. Here we go with the body paragraphs. Now, that second rectangle that you drew on your paper, you must start with the topic sentence, which will be your first argument. Here's an example. Mandating a grade requirement for a license will cause a costly, time-consuming mess for the government agency responsible. Then the next sentence will start like this. For example, okay, the reason I have that is because you need examples like this. For example, the experience of going to get a driver's license already feels like a tangled mess of paper, long lines, and irritated workers. Can you imagine what would happen if we added one more layer of red tape? And then the next few sentences in that paragraph would be dedicated to discussing all the money and the time costs associated with checking everybody's grades. Okay? You could also talk about the difficulties for students whose grades go up over the course of the year Maybe you have to run back to the driver's license bureau. Or the inconsistencies that happen if some students get their driver's license and then boom, their grades go down. Is that fair? Also, what about the difference in different high schools and grading scales? So you give a lot of specifics, just like they wanted on your grammar section, and then you end the paragraph with a thus. Thus, making this policy change will not be a great idea. Thus, making this policy change will result in many unnecessary costs. Okay, now we're going to deal with paragraph 3. Here we go. You want to begin with a transition word, and you should know them. Moreover, likewise, similarly. I always use moreover. It always works. And you continue with making it exactly like paragraph 2, except you use a different argument. Remember, this one can be your second argument, your second line of attack. You can use theirs. For example, moreover, changing the system will not be fair as there is no correlation between grades and driving ability. So I just grab that directly from the question. For example, and then you want to flesh it out just like you did in that last paragraph, examples of my new argument. For example, some students that you know make straight A's, but they're terrible drivers. Some kids on academic probation are actually incredibly skilled drivers. So you give some examples, either generally or people you know specifically. Don't use their last names. You can use their first names, though. And then you want to end with the therefore. Therefore, changing the policy will result in unfair results. Now, don't forget that you can always refer to friends. You can even have an imaginary friend, but don't ever put their last name. And remember to use thus in one paragraph to sum it up and therefore in the other paragraph to sum it up. Okay, we'll keep going. I told you it was a formula. Paragraph 4. This is called the poking holes paragraph. It's the most important paragraph of all. If you don't put it in, you won't get a good score. So you have to use it. You should begin the paragraph with that transition word we talked a lot about. However, in this paragraph, you say you have to mention an argument on the other side. But what you want to do is bring up something that you can squash down. For example, you can say, hey, that may be great for a few people, but it's not great for everyone. Or you can say, hey, that's a great idea, but it's going to cost too much. So basically what you're doing is that you're bringing up this argument, but then you're telling them why, don't listen to that. Don't listen to that. So you might say, yeah, for some people that may be true. There are some kids that make good grades that are good drivers, but it's not true for everyone. So why do we want to change a whole law for everyone? Here's an example of a formally written one. Mandating a minimum GPA for obtaining a driver's license may encourage some students to do better in school and may ensure that many teenage drivers have a sense of responsibility, but this does not warrant a systemic change so that each and every teenager must maintain a specific GPA in order to receive a license to drive. Another option would be, oh, this policy sounds great to make everyone show their GPAs, but the cost will be too much. It will be too great. And this program will be too difficult to enforce or too unfair to enforce. Okay, here's some other examples of enforcement. What if a student improves his grades or her grades during the school year? How do you deal with that? Who's going to make copies of the new GPA? Who's going to be in charge of telling the driver's license bureaus? Okay? And what about your school may be really hard to pass, another school may be very easy to pass, so that can't be right. So the idea of the poking holes paragraph is to show some weaknesses in your argument, but respond to them. Literally squash them down. Okay, at the end of that paragraph, you have to end like something like this. On balance, comma, my point of view works best. All right, then you only have one more thing. The fifth paragraph, that fifth rectangle. That's your conclusion. You can't forget it or they'll dock your score. You only really need 3 sentences, so you can write more, but you need to essentially, 1, restate your thesis, which you remember was I emphatically believe that, but you don't have to say that I emphatically part again. Then mention something great that, remember my friend Jane, who was a straight A student, but she flunked her driver's test? And then the very last sentence, you can make it really big, like if everyone listens to my point of view, we won't have these problems. Here's an example of a conclusion paragraph. In sum, I do not support changing the requirements for a driver's license to include a minimum grade specification. Fancy words mean the same thing. As the stories of many of my peers suggest, and you can call your classmates peers, it's a great word, grades do not necessarily correlate, that's another great word, with safe driving or driving skills. Then you can ask a question. Would you want to drive with someone like Susie, who makes straight A's but fails to yield when turning right on red? Moreover, I can't imagine the bureaucratic, which just means red tape, mess that will await us as we try to navigate the already overworked system with school transcripts changes, and irritated parents. If the shift to a grade requirement comes to pass, we will have one huge mess on our hands and in our streets. Now, parting thoughts on this particular section. 1, always proofread, especially the first paragraph. So you want to get this formula down pat so you have time. 2, write neatly. You can scratch things out, that's fine, but make sure it's neat. Number 3, specifics rule. Tell us about Susie and John. And number 4, they'd be very impressed if you asked questions, if you use that semicolon 2-sentence rule that we talked about. But the most important thing is to print this guide out and memorize it and learn it and try to write it before you walk in there, okay? And once you do, you're going to feel very empowered in that last 30 minutes of the test. To review, the first paragraph, a quote that you overheard at your school. Number 2, this quote could be heard in high school hallways across America, capitalized America, as students discuss, and then you put the topic there. Number 3, your thesis. I emphatically believe, and put your side. Number 4, not only will this policy blah, 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 could be something good or bad, but also it will blah, blah, blah. Okay, next paragraph. Start it with the topic sentence. You show them what you're going to prove. That's your argument. Number 2, for example. Give the example. Number 3, another example. And you can write more, but make sure those 2 examples are in there. And then your conclusion of that paragraph, therefore. You start the next paragraph with the transition word. It can be similarly or moreover. You give your second argument, which remember you can steal from them. Give your 2 examples. Talk about them a lot. Then say thus and summarize it. Then you need the all-important however paragraph, the poking hole paragraph. Even if you think of one argument that you can squash down, that's great. You can always say it works for some people, but not all. The conclusion, don't drop it. Rephrase or restate your thesis. Allude to some of your best examples. Remind them about Susie. And then the very last sentence can be an if-then kind of thing. If everyone does this, it'll be great. Or if everyone does this, it'll be terrible. Now you know how to handle this. I know you can do it. Good luck.